Have you ever wondered why every country on Earth is in debt? The United States owes over $38 trillion. The entire planet owes a staggering $315 trillion. It's a number so large it's hard to comprehend. But it begs a simple question. If every country owes money, who exactly is everyone in debt to? The answer isn't what you think, and it will fundamentally change how you view the global financial system. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a story pieced together from public records, historical documents, and the published words of the people who built our modern world. It's the story of how a system was intentionally designed, not by accident, but by brilliant financial architects, to ensure that government debt could never truly be repaid. It is a system that silently transfers trillions of dollars from ordinary people to a select group of creditors, and it all started over 300 years ago. Our story begins in 1694 with a man named William Paterson. England was financially drained from a long war with France. Paterson proposed a radical idea, a new privately owned bank that would lend the government money. In exchange, the government would grant this bank, the Bank of England, the power to issue banknotes. But here's the genius, or perhaps the trap. The charter specified that the government only had to pay the interest on the loan, not the principal. For the first time in history, permanent government debt was born. The government got its money, but it was locked into paying interest forever. A continuous stream of income was created for the bank's private shareholders, funded by the taxpayers. This model of permanent interest-bearing debt was a game-changer, but it was perfected a century later by Nathan Meyer Rothschild, a name synonymous with international finance. During the Napoleonic Wars, European governments needed massive amounts of cash to fund their armies. Rothschild revolutionized the bond market. Instead of lending directly, he acted as a broker, selling government bonds to a vast network of investors across Europe. His genius was in creating a liquid, international market for this debt. If one group of investors wanted to sell, there was always another group ready to buy. His most legendary move came after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Using his network of couriers, Rothschild learned of Napoleon's defeat a full day before the British government. He didn't just use this information to buy British bonds cheap and sell high, which he did. More importantly, he used the moment to demonstrate his absolute control over the market. By showing he could crash and then rescue the market at will, he sent a clear message to governments everywhere. His financial network was more powerful than kings and emperors. From that point on, sovereign default, a country simply refusing to pay its debts, became almost unthinkable. Who would dare to default when the Rothschild network could cut them off from all future credit? The system of permanent debt was now backed by the most powerful financial force the world had ever seen. The next major leap came in the United States, in a secret meeting that would shape the 20th century. In 1910, a group of the nation's most powerful bankers, including representatives from the Rockefeller, Morgan, and Warburg families, gathered under the cloak of secrecy on Jekyll Island, off the coast of Georgia. Their mission? To design a central banking system for America. They were worried about the growing financial instability and the public's distrust of big banks. Their solution, which would become the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, was a masterstroke of political and financial engineering. They created a system that looked like a government entity, but was, in fact, a consortium of private banks. The Federal Reserve was given the power to create money out of thin air and lend it to the US government with interest. Just like the Bank of England, this allowed for potentially infinite government borrowing. Whenever the government needed to spend more than it collected in taxes, for wars, for social programs, for anything, the Fed could simply create the money and buy government bonds. The national debt could now expand without any real limit. The bankers who met on Jekyll Island had successfully replicated and scaled the Bank of England model for the world's emerging economic superpower. The mechanism for inescapable, ever-growing national debt was now firmly in place in America. But how was this system imposed on the rest of the world? Fast forward to the early 1980s. Paul Volcker, then chairman of the Federal Reserve, dramatically raised interest rates to combat inflation in the US. This Volcker shock had a devastating ripple effect across the globe, especially in Latin America. Developing nations, which had been encouraged to take on huge dollar-denominated loans during the 1970s, when interest rates were low, suddenly found their debt payments skyrocketing. Countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina were pushed to the brink of default. This was the moment the system went truly global. Enter the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. When Mexico announced it could no longer service its debt in 1982, the IMF, working with the US Treasury, didn't forgive the debt. Instead, they offered new loans, but with strict conditions attached. These were called structural adjustment programs. In exchange for the bailout, debtor nations had to privatize state-owned industries, cut public spending on things like healthcare and education, and open their markets to foreign corporations. In essence, they were forced to sell off national assets to pay interest to international banks. The debt was never paid off. It was just restructured, ensuring a continuous flow of wealth from the developing world to the global financial centers. This model trapped nations in a cycle of debt, where they had to borrow more just to pay the interest on what they already owed. So let's bring it all together. Who is actually owed the $315 trillion? It's not another planet. The debt is owed to a complex web of creditors. These are commercial banks, investment funds, pension funds, insurance companies, other governments, and crucially central banks like the Federal Reserve. And who owns these institutions? Ultimately, it's private investors and shareholders. Here's how the modern mechanism works. When a government like the US spends more than it earns, the Treasury issues bonds. These bonds are the national debt. A significant portion of these bonds is bought by the Federal Reserve. The Fed creates the money to buy these bonds digitally, with a few keystrokes. This new money enters the economy. The government then pays interest on these bonds back to the Fed. At the end of the year, the Fed deducts its operating expenses and returns the rest of the profit to the Treasury. It sounds like a wash, a government agency paying itself, but it's not that simple. The vast majority of government bonds are held by private and foreign investors. This is the key. Every year, hundreds of billions of dollars are collected from taxpayers and paid out as interest to these bondholders. It is a direct, massive transfer of wealth from the general public to the holders of the debt. Data from the Treasury and the Bank for International Settlements confirms this flow. It's the largest, most silent wealth transfer in human history. This is why the US national debt can likely never be paid off under the current system. If the government were to pay back the $38 trillion it owes, it would have to collect that money from the economy. But much of our money supply was created as a consequence of that very debt. Paying it all back would mean extinguishing the money supply, collapsing the entire economy. It is a system designed to be inescapable. Debt must constantly expand for the system to survive. From William Patterson's charter in 1694 to Nathan Rothschild's bond markets, to the secret meeting on Jekyll Island, and to Paul Volcker's IMF restructurings, a clear pattern emerges. This isn't an accident. It is a system engineered over centuries to ensure that debt is permanent and that wealth flows from the many to the few. Understanding this history is the first step. It explains why global debt only ever goes up and why our economies feel so precarious. We are living within a structure built long ago for the benefit of its architects. The $315 trillion question isn't just about who we owe. It's about understanding the nature of the system we all live in. Thank you for watching. If this video changed the way you see the world, please consider liking and subscribing for more content that explores the systems that shape our lives. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.